In a world where education is key, finding the right math program for your kids is crucial. And that's where CTC Math steps in. This isn't just another math program, it's a comprehensive math curriculum covering everything from K to 12. What sets it apart? The video tutorials. They're not just educational, they're engaging, breaking down complex topics into bite-sized, understandable pieces. It's like having a math expert in your home, available anytime. And it's not about memorizing facts. It's about truly understanding math concepts. The kind of understanding that sticks with them, not just until the next test, but for life. Plus, the flexibility is unbeatable. Whether you're homeschooling or supplementing after-school learning, CTC Math fits into your schedule, not the other way around. Why not take the leap? Visit ctcmath.com today and start your free trial. Discover how a comprehensive curriculum can challenge your child's perspective on math. It's time to give them the tools they need to succeed. That's ctcmath.com.
Well, hello everybody. I'm Hal. Melanie's not here because she's recuperating from a medical procedure, but we got a question that was kind of directed at me. So we thought it'd be appropriate if I just did a solo version of our podcast. I want to welcome you to Making Biblical Family Life Practical. This is a follow-up from episode number 245. I had to look it up and make sure. Episode 245, Melanie and I were talking about the books that we have been reading since the pandemic, and we find some time on our hands and such like. We are pretty voracious readers, and we have found a number of different authors that we enjoy, that both of us liked, some that we discovered after we got married, some that we introduced back and forth, that had in our background and say, hey, have you ever seen this one? And one of the best things, if you're a voluminous reader like we are, is to find an author who has written a lot. And so finding series that you say, hey, I like this author, I like the kind of things that he or she does, and there's more of it. Oh, great. That's awesome. Well, at any rate, we got a call on our listener response line, and if you're interested, that number is 919-295-0321. We'll put that in the show notes and show it on our YouTube channel as well. But we got a message, and I want to play that for you right now.
Hi, Hal and Melanie. I have been listening to your podcast for a while, and I just wanted to tell you what a blessing you have been to me. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed the episode on the books you all like to read. And you kind of teased us a little bit with Hal likes to read history books, but you didn't get into it, and I would really like to know what kind of history books Hal likes to read. Again, I just want to thank you for being such a blessing. Keep up the good work. God bless.
All right. Thanks, Amy. That's really encouraging. That's Amy from West Virginia. And so since the question was kind of directed at me, I thought I would take an opportunity to elaborate a little bit, the kind of books that I prefer that are not quite Melanie's cup of tea. Just a matter of personal taste and preference, not a judgment in any sort. We did mention that I like history, and closely related to that, I like biographies. One of the things I found with biographies, when I started reading them back many years ago, particularly if I was reading about a man of proven worth and character, I found myself involuntarily thinking in different situations, how would such and such a person deal with the temptation I'm feeling? How would he deal with the difficulty or the quandary that I'm facing right now? And I thought, this is a good thing. This is following an example of somebody with a proven record, when you can look at their historical accounts and say, hey, this is a useful thing. Now I'm going to talk about biographies in the second segment. Let me go back though, and we'll just talk about the pure history. And I've got several books I want to recommend that I have really enjoyed. And in answer to one of the questions, the kind of books that I like to read, I'll be honest, it's pretty eclectic. I don't have a particular pattern or a particular strategy to my reading, but things that have been recommended by people that I trust or things that I run across and say, I'm curious about that subject. That's what I end up reading. Now, it's October here as we're putting this down, and we're thinking ahead to Thanksgiving coming up. You know, seasons do continue even during the pandemic. And you might be interested in something related to the Pilgrim settlement. Now, of course, the classic book is William Bradford's book on Plymouth Plantation. Okay, now that's a first-person account. William Bradford was governor of the colony. He was there from the very beginning. It's fascinating reading. I really enjoyed Of Plymouth Plantation. But if you want something that's a little more modern and covers a little bit longer territory with the historical perspective, not just the first-person account, but, let's look back and see how things ended up. This was a really good book, okay? This one by Nathaniel Philbrick is called Mayflower, okay? Nathaniel Philbrick, the author of The Heart in the Sea. This is a book that covers not only the Mayflower Pilgrims, but goes on to the next generation, okay? That's an interesting thing because he does a good job covering, I felt like, a very sympathetic view of the Pilgrims and what they did, and really brings out one of the outstanding things of the Pilgrim colony was their relationship with the Indians along the coast. They worked really hard to build a relationship of trust and mutual respect, even from the perspective of here's the highly developed Western English colonist moving into a society that has been Native American, that's still, agricultural and all the rest of that. And the first generation got along very well with the nearby tribes. But Philbrick goes into the second generation as the English colony is expanding and comes into more conflict with the tribes as they move further and further out into the territory, which culminated in King Philip's War, which was a dreadful, brutal event for both the English and the American Indians. And so it's an interesting book. It's a worthwhile read. Mayflower by Nathaniel Philbrick. Now, one author that I have enjoyed several of his books is Stephen Ambrose. He writes popular histories. All of these are popular, not academic histories, okay? So they're accessible, they're readable. They are, they're not real short, but they're good and you can keep up with them. It's not something that you're going to get too bogged down on. Stephen Ambrose wrote a number of things about the Second World War, but I found some of his non-World War II books to be very interesting as well. This one, okay, and I apologize for the reversed image there, okay, Undaunted Courage by Stephen E. Ambrose. It's a story of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Okay, again, it's pretty detailed and it's an excellent book. Another one he wrote, which I enjoyed. Now, I really like trains. I am fascinated by trains and railroads, and so this was one that I was going to end up reading anyway. He wrote about the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was completed in 1869. In fact, it was something that was being discussed even during the war between the states. It was a project that Abraham Lincoln was interested in, trying to link up the settlements on the West Coast with the East Coast, which, of course, at that time extended to the Mississippi and to Kansas and Texas. And so I think it was understood that if they could improve the transportation between, say, the East Coast and California, that would knit the country together and allow settlement of the interior. And so that's what they did. And so this book called Nothing Like It in the World, okay, by Stephen Ambrose. It is the men who built the Transcontinental Railroad, 1863 to 1869. Now, something that I found sort of odd that I would be reading this, because this doesn't naturally grabbed my attention, but I had heard a recommendation. Ernest Shackleton was one of the polar explorers from England during the early part of the 20th century, and he was not you would say, the most successful explorer. He was involved in the race to try to reach the South Pole first and was not successful. And there's some other disappointments in his life. But he put together an expedition with the purpose of a land navigation across the southern pole, okay, to go across from coast to coast through the South Pole, across Antarctica. So he put together this expedition as the First World War was breaking out, and at the time, the time hostilities began in 1914, he was just about ready to launch, and he basically put the question up to the Admiralty. Well, the First Lord of the Admiralty at the time was Winston Churchill, and Churchill said, you know what, this is important for England and for the world, and so you go ahead. You've got your ships, you've got your men, everything's funded, you're ready to go, just watch out for submarines and take off. And so he did. So they launched the Endurance and another ship, I think the Aurora, and went to Antarctica. They were going to try and to go from one side to the other, and that's why they had a base built on, or a base to settle on either side of the continent down there. However, one problem, the Endurance, which was the ship that Shackleton was on, the Endurance got caught in the pack ice and was frozen up solid for quite a few months. Well, when the pack ice broke, the ship was actually crushed and sank. They managed to evacuate the crew and a lot of the supplies and get them off onto the ice cap. Well, then began the thing that he's most famous for. They had to figure out a way to survive on the on the Antarctic ice cap, the ice floes and whatnot, and then they had to figure out how they were going to rescue themselves. And so they managed to travel a certain distance and put up a semi-permanent camp, and then Shackleton and 5 companions took an open boat and they went 830 miles across the Antarctic Ocean to try to find help from a whaling station on the southern tip of South America. They were successful. Unbelievable odds. They managed, and Shackleton managed to arrange the rescue of not only himself and his companions in the open boat, but the 22 men that they left behind on the ice floe. So everybody from the Endurance survived the trip. They survived the ordeal. Absolutely incredible story. And so the book is called simply South. It's just South, and it's by Sir Ernest Shackleton. It's the journals of his last expedition to Antarctica, which is not exactly quite true because he did make one further expedition and died en route, so he didn't actually get to Antarctica there. A couple other books on the historical side. A couple of years ago, I had the privilege of interviewing the grandson of General George Patton. Yes, that General Patton. It's interesting. Robert H. Patton, his grandson, never met the general, who died, I think, in 1946, if I'm not mistaken, any rate, immediately after the war. He wrote an interesting book called Patriot Pirates, which is about the use of privateers by the Continental Navy during the War for Independence. Interesting book, and I can highly recommend that. But he told me at the time, and this has been several years ago, he told me at the time, I'm working on a book about war correspondence. Okay, so I was watching for that, and one thing led to another, and I missed it when it first came out. But I finally found a copy recently, and I read it this summer. There's an interesting little incident in there where war correspondents were not great favorites of most of the generals in the Civil War. And one of the Union generals was informed that a certain war correspondent had died during the previous battle, that he had been killed sometime during the day's fighting. And the general's response was, "Good, then we'll have dispatches from hell before breakfast." Well, okay, that's the title of the book, Hell Before Breakfast. It's an interesting book because I didn't realize this, but the practice of embedding reporters with the traveling armies was not really a thing before the Crimean War of the 1850s. And so in the Civil War time, it was still a fairly new thing. That, coupled with the telegraph, the use of the telegraph actually shaped the way journalism is done. The idea that we have to get the story into the lead paragraph, it's got to be summarized and tight and a minimum number of words, because there's only a certain amount of bandwidth on that telegraph wire, and it's expensive. So that's just an interesting thing, how the technology shapes the message. Neil Postman said that, right? The technology will tell you what kind of message you can send. Okay, one last thing in this segment I want to talk about. Daniel Allen Butler has written a couple of books, one that I read a little earlier this summer called The Other Side of Night. If you've ever read A Night to Remember, that's kind of the definitive book about the sinking of the Titanic, and it's from the late 50s, I believe. Well, Butler knew the author of A Night to Remember, and he decided to write a book about the ships that responded to the distress message from the Titanic, and it's called The Other Side of Night. And it's a fascinating book in itself. It's really a story of two ships and two captains with very different responses, and I won't spoil the story for you, but you might look that up. He also wrote a book called Warrior Queens. Here's the title, Warrior Queens. You can read that backwards, right? Okay. The Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth were ocean liners, and they're very fast and very large ocean liners that were converted into troop ships during the Second World War. So this is the story of those two liners and their service in military times. So interesting. There's just an eclectic look at books that I have read recently or remember with some fondness on a variety of historical topics. As I said, I'm not, I like military history. I like American history, but I'm also interested in other things too. So it's pretty broad-based. We have, as we said, episode 245. We talked about a lot of types of books that Melanie and I both enjoy. Also, if you look on our blog, we have some things like interesting books from 2019, the article from last, about the first of the year, where I talked about a lot of the things that I'd read. Again, a variety of things of different reasons, different types that you might find interesting recommendations. Okay. Anyway, I mentioned our listener response line, and I do want to say if you would like to comment or make a request or a suggestion for a future show, you can call our listener response line at 919-295-0321. And we hope that you will join us again on making biblical family life practical, knowing that there's a lot that goes into a biblically oriented family life, and sometimes it's something that may not reference Scripture exactly, but it may fit into a biblical mindset. We hope you'll join us again. I'm going to give you another segment after this to talk a little bit about some of the biographies that I've found very useful, and hope that you'll join me for that. Okay? Until next time, I'm Hal, and I'll say hello on behalf of Melanie. Thanks for listening. Bye.
You've been listening to Making Biblical Family Life Practical with Hal and Melanie Young. If you found this program interesting, challenging, and encouraging, why not join us on the web at halandmelanie.com. That's HALANDMELANIE.com. Or follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Facebook/Hal and Melanie or Facebook.com/Raising Real Men. This program is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Join us next week when we'll be back to talk about making biblical family life practical. Until then, thank you and God bless you for listening.